Hey Aldrich, yeah, you're in the right place. I'm glad you could help me out today. So here's what we're doing. Oh, okay, sure, go ahead and take that call. In spite of the technological world we're immersed in, it probably didn't cross Aldrich's and our own minds that when we communicate, a lot of the words we use are extremely old. Speech is something we do every day without giving it a second thought. Oh, by the way, that word thought is a vestige of an ancient language we've come to call Anglo-Saxon or Old English. So why am I talking about Old English and apps anyways? Well, not only because I'm a bit of a linguistics and history nerd, but because the story of the English language we share is an epic example of how sociological and cultural change can morph and propel our language forwards. And this process is still going on today. English has a really long and complex history, but what we can do in the space of 5 to 8 minutes is get a snapshot of pivotal moments that speak to English's resilience and adaptability. This is really a story of social staying power. It's the year 878, and there are two things keeping this Anglo Saxon guy up at night. The first is the Vikings.
Dun dun dun.
You know, those overly aggressive Danes from the north who decided to pay a not so friendly visit to England back in the 7th century. You'd think the cultural and political turmoil these Danish invasions caused would preoccupy the Anglo Saxons. But the second thing that really concerns our friend is the well being of his language. For this is King Alfred the Great of Wessex. Despite the Danes' aggressive attempts to claim the Anglo Saxons' territory and erase their culture, Alfred was able to boost the people's morale through the one thing that united them: language. To reinforce and sustain English, Alfred created the Anglo Saxon Chronicles, which provide a thorough account of these people and their history. They also mark the beginning of our language's immense staying power. Alfred was all about accessibility when it came to spreading English, and he believed promoting literacy and education was just the way to do it. In his words, we should translate certain books which are most necessary for men to know into the language we can all understand, and also arrange for them to read English writing well. And his plan to protect and promote English definitely worked. The 100 most commonly used words today, words like the, of, have, in, part, if, and many others, are all Old English.
Really?
Yeah, really. Even during years of conflict with the Danes, English persisted but also changed. Danish heavily influenced English's word order, which was originally Latin based, and it added a load of words to the language's relatively small vocabulary, especially those beginning with SK, like skin and skirt. Because of this new word burst, Old English became more specific and old words developed distinctive meanings, like sick as in not well, or the Anglo-Saxon word hide, which referred to the skin of animals and people. But when the Danish skin came along, hide was only used for animals. So it seemed like English could turn around the conflict with the Danes and use it to its advantage. But our story doesn't end there. Just as English was making its mark and getting kind of comfortable, another foreign threat appeared. Fast forward to 1066. If you're expecting another invasion, then you'd be totally right. This time, the French-speaking Count William of Normandy dropped another linguistic bomb when he led an attack on the Anglo-Saxons at the Battle of Hastings. This famous Norman conquest resulted in the death of the country's leader, King Harold, leaving England and the English language leaderless. The Bayeux Tapestry provides a visual account of the events leading up to the battle that would change England and English forever. The French ruled with a suffocating grip, controlling official and legal matters only in French. English rapidly sunk to the depths of the lower class, and 80% of Old English vocabulary would disappear. Today, the English language is peppered with French words, which not surprisingly originated on the battlefield and have political roots. Army, guard, throne, crown, and peasant. By the way, peasant is an important word, so hang on to it. By this point, we all know English is stubborn, and we also know how history repeats itself. Just as Old English was challenged by Danish and survived by integrating words from that language and anglicizing them, so it did with French. And from the 11th to the 14th century, this innate ability to compromise and assimilate marked a new era known as Middle English. During this period, the medieval world also endured one of the most catastrophic events of all time, the bubonic plague or Black Death. This epidemic caused the deaths of around 75 million people across Europe. But in a strange twist of fate, it also helped the English language to survive and even grow. Here's how. The Norman conquest, in combination with feudalism, created a strict class divide. This was crucial since the cities were dominated by upper class French officials and rulers, while the countryside was where the lower class peasants who spoke Old English lived. But whenever you get a larger population, disease spreads more rapidly and more deaths occur. So, sayonara Norman French. Meanwhile, in the countryside, the peasant class was less affected by the plague, and eventually they relocated to cities like London, where they took over property and positions formerly held by Norman officials. And English was once again on the rise. Hey, does this guy look familiar? He might be driving you crazy in English class this year, but good thing he survived the plague, because Geoffrey Chaucer is one of the first and most successful poets to write not in French, but in his native English tongue, and his stories, like the Canterbury Tales, were really popular with many different social classes. And this influence spread to legal documents as well. For 350 years, it was customary for royalty to write official documents in French. But in 1420, Henry V, inspired by his father before him, turned this custom on its head and ordered official documents to be written in English. This was an advancement for English, but there was an underlying problem. Although spoken English was gaining control, many different dialects were used across the country. There were over 60 different pronouns for she, and the word people was spelt in many different ways. Combine that with different local accents, and you've got a major communication disaster waiting to happen. It was time for English to become standardized, and during Henry V's reign, this happened and became known as Chancery Standard. But without the work of William Caxton, this new standard for English might not have flourished. He was a successful merchant who was the first to establish the printing press technology in England in 1473. Thanks to Caxton's printing press, Chancery English was reinforced as the language of the people, and multiple editions of popular works like Chaucer's Canterbury Tales were sold throughout England. A century later, printed publication of the works of one of the world's greatest wordsmiths, William Shakespeare, would not have been possible without Caxton's contribution. The printing press marked a milestone in technology and communication, things that we are so accustomed to today. Without this 15th century invention, we wouldn't have a crucial technology that most of us rely on daily. Invented in 1984 by Matty McConan, texting is something some might even do religiously. This medium of communication has had a massive influence on our approach to communication, our social interaction, and generally on our way of life. For 135 years, the telephone was considered indispensable. People could not live without it. But recently, texting has taken priority over audio communication. Naturally, texting has spawned many sociological questions regarding interaction. MIT psychologist Sherry Turkle observes how texting removes fundamental components of face to face interaction. There's no verbal tone, body language, or physical contact, and so it can confuse communication and relationships. Texting has also shifted English in a major way. Abbreviations, acronyms, and emojis are creatively rewriting our language, condensing and recoding the symbols we use, and accelerating communication around the globe. The virtual connectedness texting creates is reflected on a more macro scale, as we see English taking on the world, quite literally, and expanding to become an international language of business or a lingua franca. Today, there are over 1.5 billion English speakers in the world. The trials and tribulations our language has faced are incredible. What's even crazier is how it's evolved and thrived in the most challenging conditions, from foreign invasion to devastating pandemic to technological overload. English is in a constant state of flux. Where will it take us next?